second. Hey, welcome everyone. It is Wednesday, March 25th, almost end of the first quarter of 2026. Welcome to Direct Line. And our special guest today is Council Member Sean Flaherty and candidate for State Delegate in District 2B, Hagerstown, and other parts of Washington County. Our hosts tonight are Jackie Saxton, our hostess with the mostest, and filling in for vacationing Mark Unkfer is David Shepard. Take it away, guys.
You know, he makes fun of me for being on cruises, but I feel like he's on vacation more than I am. I'm just saying. Well, Sean, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, this is an episode I'm super excited about, having one of my YRs on who's running in what I would argue is probably the most likely flip that we have going into the midterms this year. So I like to think that you're only running because I begged you to do so, but what made you decide that this was what you wanted to do to run for delegate?
Well, I had a lot of pressure from also my Senator Quarterman, who's also my neighbor, who's blowing up my phone. And, you know, we had a hard time recruiting candidates for 2B. And I did beat our incumbent delegate, Matthew Schindler, for city council by a good amount. And then what happened was after I won, shortly after, our current state delegate, Brooke Grossman, she resigned. And the Democratic Central Committee appointed Matthew to finish the rest of her term. But, you know, I really am concerned about the direction our state's going in with the taxes, you know, the crime. You know, I look at the quality of life issues, and the cost of living is just outrageous, you know, and I think that the policies in Annapolis are not very popular here in Hagerstown, and people are really getting fed up. I have residents that complain to me about their utility and tax bills all the time. You know, people are concerned about jobs here. We don't have the high-paying, you know, government jobs that Montgomery and Prince George's County does. And really, I think people just want quality of life issues addressed, not social justice issues. And, you know, right now, my opponent did vote to put tampons in men's bathrooms, and he's kind of gone along with his party on most of what the craziness is happening in Annapolis. And, you know, I talked to all the voters, you know, all the residents here, and, you know, that's not their top concern. They want their, you know, their taxes lowered. They want to feel safe. They want more police, you know, and they want economic growth and development, which I'm all for. And they want fair representation with redistricting. As you know, we live in CD6. It's very uphill. The Dems have kind of destroyed the map for our current district. And, you know, we all know that our current congresswoman doesn't even live in our district, and she doesn't really represent the values of our county or area. And people want more like-minded people to be elected that, you know, represent them.
I was actually just reading on the redistricting front. The Baltimore Sun put out an article saying that the Maryland House panel quietly added redistricting language to election bills. So they're trying to get away with it one way or the other. So we definitely need more people up in Annapolis giving some oversight. So you are currently a sitting city councilman in Hagerstown. So one of the big things coming out of Hagerstown recently has been the quote-unquote controversy about the ICE facility. And I know that even the Democrats on the city council have refused to kind of play that game with Westmore. So can you talk a little bit about what's been going on with that?
Yeah, I would actually say I'm proud of our Republican mayor and even the rest of the Dems on the council. We've been kind of unified. And, you know, we had a photo op with Governor Moore and Congresswoman Delaney. They came to Hub City Vinyl on Monday here. You know, they only invited certain media that they liked. It was not open to the public. The assistant mayor of Boonesboro was denied entry. Currently, the only Republican that was allowed was our current Republican mayor, Bill McIntyre. And what's even crazier is that we weren't even contacted about the event. We found out about it on Facebook. So I didn't even know about it. We didn't get any emails. And, you know, as you know, Governor Moore has to get Delaney over the finish line to Trone because she's in a very tough primary. And that's what all that was about. And, you know, on top of that, there was no, you know, they said that DHS and the county commissioners haven't been transparent, but they weren't transparent when they had their press conference on Monday. And they hand selected certain people, which are really their big supporters, to be there. And I'm actually elected to represent the residents here, and I wasn't even invited. So, but we do, we provide water for the facility. It's technically in Williamsport right now, but the Dems are getting very energized on their side to use this as a weapon for a campaign issue. But the problem is it can only go so far. I mean, the quality of life issues, as I mentioned earlier, about taxes and crime and things like that, that's not getting addressed. And people are more concerned about that. But, I've noticed that every politician comes up to the ICE facility in Williamsport to do their photo ops, and then they go back to where they're at. And they don't even care about the day lives of the residents that live here, that do pay taxes, that, we don't have a fancy Whole Foods. We don't have a cheesecake factory. We've got Waffle House and Walmart. And, we have folks that are struggling here that aren't making more than $50,000 a year. So that's really people's top concerns here. But, it was a sham press conference that happened on Monday. And the Congresswoman's office knew better, but they just snuck it under there. And I had several reporters told me they weren't invited, and they were very upset about that. So, I think that it's not a good look for her campaign and what she's doing here.
I would almost think that the left is so rabid in terms of anti-ICE that they wouldn't want to even show up. But they tried to do it, I guess, because they felt, well, I guess that's a sort of a responsibility. It's an important thing. But I don't know. I just don't totally understand the politics of this because, even when you had Biden or Obama and Clinton, you're going to have to deport people who are here illegally. So I just don't know how you can not have these sort of facilities.
Well, and they care more about illegal aliens and criminals than their own law-abiding constituents. And from what I know, it's going to be a processing facility. It's not going to be a detention facility. I get emails, hundreds of them, saying you're supporting a concentration camp here, which is ridiculous. And, it's not a concentration camp. And the majority of those emails are coming from Montgomery and Frederick. They're not coming from the residents here. A lot of the residents support the facility because it will bring jobs and things like that. Even our mayor in our current statement said, the immigration debate needs to be debated in the halls of Congress, not City Hall.
Right.
And that's kind of where we stand as a city. We provide water. We even I heard the Congresswoman contact the mayor here and said, can you cut off the water? He said, we can't legally do that. We had a recent city council meeting earlier in March where we told all the residents here what the process is for any new facility, warehouse or what, to get water hooked up. We have city ordinances and laws that have to be followed. We can't just decide to, refuse service for any type of business that they're not paying. So, we made this about rules and processes, which, it's funny, libs love government. We just gave it more to them and said, yeah, we can't do that. So the attorney general is wasting our taxpayer money with all these frivolous lawsuits, really, and it's not going to go anywhere. They had an injunction to stop of a work order, but it's not going to, derail the long-term plan. So, but,
And I would imagine in Hagerstown, the feeling's different than in Montgomery County, I assume. Or
vastly.
Yeah. So, among your constituents, I guess most people are either in favor or they don't really care. In other words, the people saying that it's like another concentration camp are, I would assume, are a fringe, or the far left.
Montgomery County people.
Right. Okay.
So, you don't have to out anybody, but are any of the Democrats on the council, do they come up to you secret and they're like, actually, we want this thing here. The ICE presence would be great to kind of get some of this out.
Well, nobody did, but we were unified on the council because Governor Moore was trying to pressure us to put a statement about it. We all agreed we're not getting into it. So even the Dems agreed, you know what, we've got enough problems. If you go to Hagerstown, we have a big drug addiction issue. You walk around downtown, people are shooting and, shooting drugs in themselves in broad daylight, walking around like zombies. A lot of the shootings we have here is, drug related, and people are hurting here with that. And, I ran a city council on a platform of public safety and economic development, and people are tired of seeing that. We've had businesses try to flee the city limits because they're like, the taxes are too high. I don't feel safe here. I've had people, saying they've watched people defecate in front of their businesses. I went to Atomic Comics downtown, and they're going to leave here. They've been open since the 80s because they're tired of picking up human poop outside their door. So we don't want to become San Francisco and Portland. We did pass the anti-camping ordinance that I very much championed on. The rest of the council, the Dems on there, did not support that, but I will give it to Mayor McIntyre. He kind of put a lot of pressure on them. And I said, we don't criminalize homelessness. We tell folks, you have to leave public property. We have resources. There's even a social worker that goes with Hagerstown Police, and we help them out. We only arrest them if they refuse to leave. But we don't want to see, San Francisco, Portland, where these liberal ideas with tents everywhere, people are high on drugs, and they don't feel safe downtown. And we don't want that to continue here. I think Hagerstown's a great place to live and work at. We want to attract the folks that are going to make our town better. And we also, we become a dumping ground where we have the prisons here. And then as soon as they get released, they go to downtown where all the halfway houses and all the social services are at. And we've had other people bring people by the bus loads and they're dropping them off here. And they say, well, Hagerstown's got all the good services. And they don't have good credit scores, so they live in the hotels in town. And, you see them walking along the dual highway. And those aren't the type of folks we want to attract. We want some higher income earners. We kind of support data centers because we don't have that type of income here. And, and we do border Loudoun County to the south, which is the wealthiest county in the United States. And we kind of would wish that wealth would trickle down here. But I do say, I will give it to the Dems on the council. We've been unified about our whole statement about ICE. We don't want to get too into it because we have enough of our issues in the city limits, and ICE isn't one of them.
Yeah.
So have you been paying attention? Oh yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Oh no, I just think, and I'm an outsider, but when I think of Hagerstown, I think of a pretty sensible sort of place. I've been a few times. It seems like a great town. So I would imagine that Hagerstown sort of, and maybe I'm wrong, but pretty sensible. In other words, more so than a Montgomery County, I would think.
A lot of blue collar folks here.
Yeah.
We have a lot of warehouses, and that's, the one thing is the county commissioners years ago planned for them, but a lot of them haven't been bought by businesses. And that's why ICE and some other folks have captured them up. 81's become a disaster because they put all these warehouses there, but there's all these 18-wheelers, and a lot of folks get mad here when they say, wait a second, Baltimore's going to get a red line, Montgomery's going to get a purple line. We can't even widen 12 miles of Interstate 81 that stretches from West Virginia to Pennsylvania and Maryland in between. And Senator Corbin has been fighting that for years. And Dems have tried to take it out of the budget. And we feel like our part of the state is not getting attention. And there was this whole succession movement of joining West Virginia, which I don't support, but I see why people are angry and frustrated because they're not hearing our voices in Annapolis. They don't care about our needs. And let's face it, over the border, Trump won every single county in West Virginia by 70%. And I border Pennsylvania, which Trump won Pennsylvania. And many times our residents feel like we're more aligned to those states than we are the rest of Maryland. And I lived in Montgomery County. I lived in Silver Spring. I lived by the Glenmont Metro. I worked at the Pentagon for several years. There's a lot of high paying jobs there, but it's very expensive to live. And that's why I bought my home here in Hagerstown, where my mortgage is cheaper than my studio apartment was in Alexandria. And I have a big house in the nice part of town. And, we want to attract those type of folks here that are going to contribute to our community, make it better, not make it worse. And we want people here to be part of our community. And, and I think I have family originally from this area, and it's a much more conservative area. And, and the good thing about Hagerstown, you're an hour to DC and Baltimore, on a weekend without the traffic. And the cost of living is not nearly as bad as those areas.
Yeah.
Right. So we're just had crossover this week for legislative session. Have you been keeping track of? I know we talked about tampons in boys' bathrooms, but are there other bills that you've been keeping track of that you're like, oh, absolutely not? Like, this is what I would be standing up fighting against.
I mean, like you said earlier, the redistricting, they're trying to slide that in. I will applaud, Senate President Bill Ferguson, who said we're not doing that, even when Hakeem Jeffries came up trying to put a good show to convince them. And they want to get rid of our only Republican congressman there. And I have concerns that my opponent did vote for the Reparations Commission, which, we're already in $2 billion budget deficit. We can't afford that, And I see the Dems just continuously going on a social justice crusade, but they're neglecting quality of life issues here. And, and I even put on my website, the liberal comptroller, Brooke Laramine, had said, we've lost over 500,000 people. They're leaving Maryland. There's a reason why they're going to Texas and Tennessee and Florida, no state income tax. I don't know if y'all are familiar with, but there's a gentleman that I would buy my campaign signs near BWI, and he did a very good rate. He moved to my home state of South Carolina because the taxes were killing him here. So if I order my campaign signs for delegate, I got to get them from South Carolina. So, I would say there's a whole lot of bills that he's voted for that I don't support. I would say, the big one lately, I think the tampon one died in the Senate. I think he did vote for it in the House. Yeah. So
which makes it doubly embarrassing. It's like you voted for a horrible bill, and even your colleagues know it's a horrible bill. And
I mean, I could call him Tampon Schindler, like was it Tampon Tim for Tim Ball, And
by the way, I think I know the argument for this, but is it because they've got to believe that the boy could become a girl and therefore could get pregnant? I guess that's
they won't use that argument though. The argument they use is like, oh well, if you're a good boyfriend and your girlfriend gets her period and didn't bring a tampon, or you're a single father and I'm like, no, we're pretty good about bringing our own stuff with us. Like,
or they can get pregnant, or they can get pregnant and have periods.
Yeah, and I would think if a girl in school needed that product, I don't think she'd ask a guy for that. Wouldn't she ask another girl?
Especially like a teenage girl or like a middle school girl. That would be the most, if I can picture myself in middle school, I'd be like, that would be the most horrific thing I could think of ever having to do.
So it's, but yeah, I'd hit him on that because it just, and same thing with the slavery reparations. You ought to ask how many former slaves are still alive and how many former slaveholders are still alive.
We don't want to give them an excuse to have things to spend the money to research.
Well, and then they had the IT business tax. That's one thing I would like to see repealed. They also have the Empower. They do the utility, fee on top of that for the green, stuff. So, it's crazy. I already paid over $1,200 for my utility bill. I only live by myself. Yeah. It's outrageous. And imagine folks that are on fixed incomes, folks that, have been crying to me about that. And Schindler, when he was on city council, he voted for all the utility increases, Well,
and to your point about Empower, the Republicans this year, when they were debating the budget, did try to bring that forward and repeal that. And the Dems, of course, shut it down. Same thing with, I think today they shut down an amendment to roll back the increase in registration fees for your car. Like any common sense, like I feel like both sides could get on board with this reform to try and save any sort of money has just been absolutely shut down.
Yeah, he actually did vote for that, which I was shocked. But now that he knows I'm running against him, maybe that will persuade him to vote a little bit more to the center. But I'm not too helpful with his last record. And I looked at his campaign finance report. I see Congressman Delaney gave him over $3,000. So I guess he's trying to buy him off before Trone does. But again, I just, there's a lot of insanity in Annapolis that I've seen. And, we have a lot of Marylanders and people in Hagerstown, we're struggling. We don't have the jobs here. We don't, the average income's $45,000, and I voted against every single tax increase on city council. I've voted against all of the utility increases. I voted against all the property tax increases. I voted against all the red light cameras because they're not about public safety. They're about grabbing your money.
Don't get me started. That's like Dwight and bike lanes.
They're going to go after the people that go to work that are, they're late to work. Yeah. And, I lived in Montgomery County and we called it the communist county because there's one in every corner there. And I don't want to.
They just outed 200 more last year. That's why I'm like,
Wow.
And,
I don't like him. I don't like him either. I don't like him either. And then,
as somebody who's gotten 3 of them, they have a little note. They're like, "This isn't it's not a speeding ticket. You're not getting points on your license." Like, okay, so it's just a cash grab. Got it, right? Yeah, and they're all downhill streets where they just recently decreased the speed limit. It's such it kills me. And the other thing that's really big, and you were talking about the red line, the purple line, is they keep trying to potentially go with this mileage tax in the state. And that really disproportionately affects places like Hagerstown and Western Maryland, where people don't really have that option of public transportation and they're being penalized for having to drive to their jobs.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. You're going to make the money in Montgomery and DC, you're going to have to commute. And that's, exactly. Because I think, they're saying we're not getting enough tax revenue from the gas tax. So let's put a little, thing on your car. They'll do by the mileage. And that's going to completely screw everybody that does have to drive because you can make the DC money and live like a king here. And that's going to discourage them from wanting to move here further, And I definitely think that Maryland and even Virginia, they need to get another, with infrastructure. I think that, I think it's kind of crazy also that 270 hasn't been widened between Frederick and Clarksburg, but it's 3 lanes the whole way from Frederick to Baltimore, which doesn't quite make sense. And then we really need another bridge into Virginia because 15 is a nightmare bottleneck, and you have a lot of folks in Frederick that might go to Dulles Airport or just go to Loudoun County to go shopping, and they can't do that. But, I'm very concerned about that. And I know the IT tax was very concerning too, which I believe one legislator said he had to move his business out of the state of Maryland. And he voted
Brian
for it.
Crosby. And now he's not even running again. He voted for it and is not even running again.
What an idiot. I mean, he voted for that bill, but yet he moved his business out of here. And, there's so many taxes we can repeal, but I think Democrats in Annapolis, they just love to spend. And there's nothing they want to cut. And let's also talk about the blueprint for Maryland. That's been a complete disaster for taxpayers here. It's constantly costing us money. It's not getting us anywhere. And I believe a lot of the costs are going to be to local municipalities too. So that's going to hurt us as well. And, we don't bring in the money that other counties might have. And you have a lot of rural counties in Maryland that we just seem to kind of get overlooked and our voice isn't really heard at all.
Yeah. So have you started knocking doors yet? I mean, you don't have a primary, which is very helpful, but have you been talking to voters? I mean, you have that opportunity as a city councilman already, but have you started hearing from more voters since you've announced your campaign?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm having my campaign kick off on April 17th. So, we're going to be door knocking, shortly as soon as we can. I'm going to get a head start of him because I don't take any race for granted. He's ran twice for city council and he's lost. He's never won anything. I've lived in Hagerstown since 2021, moved here, and I beat him. So, we're going to get a head start on that very soon. I've had several other candidates that want to help me, and I've told any Republican candidate locally, when I'm door knocking in the city, bring your literature and you can come with me. So, we have Numenor. I did that last time. Last time, with all y'all's help, we knocked on over 10,000 houses, and I only won by 21 votes. So every vote counts. And I think with the local elections here, they don't know, even our school board, we got rid of all the Democrats last election. It's all Republicans now on our school board. We wiped them clean. We these are the people you vote for if you don't want to see men in women's bathrooms. And that's what we did. And we overwhelmingly won. There's only one Democrat in the school board, and we got to get rid of her this year. So other than that, I think if we replicate that success, we'll be fine. But Dems are energized with the ICE facility here. Trone and Delaney have a contested race. They're going to probably try to buy off anybody politically, locally, if they can, and I can see that happening. But I do think I don't take any for granted. I think it's still going to be uphill to go against Delegate Schindler because Republicans, as you know, we don't generally do that well in city limits. We do very well in suburbs or rural areas, but any city, we're going to have an uphill battle. Now, even, we're a ruby red county. Trump won 60% of the vote here, but the city of Hagerstown is not ruby red. We're probably light blue / purple. I do think that this seat can swing either way. My good friend, former Delegate Brenda Cham, who's running for lieutenant governor, she held the seat. It went back with Delegate Brooke Grossman and now Matthew Schindler. So it's kind of gone back and forth. And each candidate that has won has not won by very much. So we're going to have to really, I'm hoping that other folks in the state will look at our race and try to put more of an effort in. And, I'm going to do what I did last time, if not more. I've always had the mentality of campaigning 50 points behind, and I did a lot of that. I'm from South Carolina. I worked for Senator Lindsey Graham. I was an intern for Senator Jim DeMint. I worked for Governor Mark Sanford. I did stuff for Gresham Barrett, and I was in the Army National Guard for 7 years. Even Nikki Haley's husband was in my unit. So, I kind of knew what I did before I came here. But, at the end of the day, I think I make it about quality of life issues, not social justice issues. People are going to care about that. And, and I've always had an open door in city council. I've talked with plenty of Democrats that don't like them raising their property taxes. I've had several Democratic business owners in town that really liked me because I didn't go along with that. And, I said, I want to keep businesses here. I don't want to make y'all go to other states. West Virginia is building left and right over the border and they're fleeing there or they're fleeing to Pennsylvania because they're not getting their money's worth in Maryland. The taxes are too high. They don't feel safe. They don't want to see people defecating in front of their business here and they don't want to pick up needles all the time. I have residents here that I walk with to pick up the needles with them. and it's insane with the policies in Maryland where they just let open drug use run rampant, and it's killing our city.
Yeah, it's not healthy. What is the mood among people there in your district about Wes Moore? Is he people gotten a sense of him? In other words, is he influential, you think, if he gets involved in these races? Or I almost get the sense that he seems to be struggling.
He's barely visited here since he got elected in 2022.
Okay.
He's come here 3 or 4 times for photo ops, usually with local Democrats. He's not very popular here. In fact, he's not really popular in the state.
Yeah.
I definitely think that he's very charismatic, and he's a young, Black charismatic governor, but his policies are not popular.
Yeah.
And when you start talking about his policies and what Democrats are supporting, they start to get heartburn. So he's barely been here. He doesn't really care about Hagerstown. He's not really made any effort here. And this is a red county. Even Dan Cox won 60% of the vote against him in 2022. I do think that Democrats are not going to come into areas where they're not liked. Senator Alsterbrooks has not been here one time since she's been elected. So she came during in 2024 when she ran for Senate. She came to one event for a meet and greet here. She has not been here since. She does, I heard a comment. She doesn't even really like the rural counties that much. So,
I don't think she knows where they are.
Yeah. Well, and I noticed on her Facebook page, she stays in Montgomery, Prince George's, and Baltimore, Howard. Yep. She doesn't really come to any other parts of the state. So it's not just us that she's neglecting. It's, the rest of her constituents, which is really sad. Even our city administrator. I think it can be said
about most of our statewide representation.
Yeah. Even our city administrator had to go to D.C. the other week to just get a hold of her to talk about things we need, and that's kind of bad. So, and even Van Hollen has come up here to do his photo ops at the ICE facility, but he doesn't come here anymore to do anything, and, I think Wes Moore, Hogan is very popular here. His record, he came a lot to Western Maryland when he was governor. He was here for the opening of the stadium. I met him for the first time at the Boys and Girls Club opening here in town last year. I definitely think he seems to really care about our needs. He's been wanting 81 widened for years, where the Democrats have taken the money out. And we get mad when we see the urban counties getting all the projects they want, but yet we can't widen 12 miles of interstate here. So, I think that Westmore, I think that he's the clear favorite to win because of he's an incumbent. He's got money, but I think he's going to limp along to the finish line. He doesn't have a high approval rating for being in a very blue state. And I think that's going to be an issue for him. And I think whoever's nominating our side, I hope we can give him more of a run for the money than who our nominee was in 2022.
Yeah.
And, I don't want us to make the same mistake we did in 2022, because as you know, this is a very blue state. If us Republicans are united, we're going to win, but if we're not, we're fighting and we're just, doing stupid stuff. The Dems have an advantage over us. And we're seeing that now where we have 8 Democrats that filed for county commissioner here, which in 2022, only 2 of them did. So they're getting very ballsy and bold. And I've told the local Republicans, do not take that for granted. Don't take it lightly. You need to realize that you guys need to up your game. We both do.
Nothing's a sure thing.
Yeah.
And look what people are saying about it in West Palm Beach, which is where Mar-a-Lago is. The Democrat just flipped that seat in the state legislature. And it's like, it's only a red city, red district, as long as people actually get out and vote and the work goes into it.
We got to make sure our voters get there and tell them what our message is, which is public safety, lower taxes, economic development, and quality of life issues. And, I think that if we focus on that and not tampons in men's bathrooms and reparations commissions, we might get somewhere, and we don't do that. Like I even saw one of the Montgomery County meetings, they had a whole meeting about pronouns, but how is that affecting anybody's life when, your tax bill's continuously rising and people are screaming about that there, and, so.
You should dust off he's for they, them, because I think that's the case here. I think that's the case. And, the buzzword, and I guess it's still a popular buzzword, affordability. I think affordability is another way of saying, real issues as opposed to a lot of the cultural issues.
Well, and we had a recent meeting here about rent control. The Democrats want to do that, which they wanted to make us like Montgomery County. And guess what? We had 50 people sign up. Yeah. Only 3 were for rent control. The rest were all against it.
Okay, good.
That's what they, what they said? We're not Montgomery County. We don't want to be Montgomery County. And
Right.
they already said, you want cheaper rents, you want cheaper housing, we'll build more. You know, and you notice in West Virginia, they have a lot less regulations that are building left and right versus Maryland.
Yeah,
You know, and that's an issue here. So, you know, again, you know, I want cheaper rents for everybody. I want cheaper, you know, housing prices, and, you know, but it's all about supply and demand. I don't want us to become California where you're buying a fixer upper for $800,000,
right.
you know, and you're selling it for 1.2 because the NIMBYs refuse to have any development, you know, and we can't do the same here. And, you know, I'm also on the Hagerstown Planning Commission. I've approved every single development that I have. If we've only disapproved any development, it's because we don't like the engineering plans and it's creating more traffic, which they can fix. But other than that, we support growth. We want more houses, which is going to make housing cheaper here. And it is still significantly cheaper to buy a new house here versus Montgomery County, where you can't find a whole lot for under $500,000 there. So, I bought my home for under $300 in 2021, and that's why I moved here. But you know, that's a constant issue, and we did have the rent control meeting, but it was overwhelmingly, and I think the other council members got the hint that rent control is not popular. We're not going to be among Donnie, New York policies here. And even our rents are still significantly cheaper than Montgomery County and DC, you know? So, I mean, and I get rents and everything's gone up everywhere, not just Hagerstown, but, you know, again, get government out of the way, get private businesses, get people in there to build. And I think you'll see results, but we just don't have that coming out of Annapolis right now.
You know, one thing, and I'm in Fairfax County, Virginia, and one thing I've noticed, and maybe it's the same that you've noticed, is that I think there's an effort to make it, as much as they talk about affordability, I think they want to drive out certain people and they want others. So in other words, in Fairfax County, it used to be kind of swing. I mean, Democrats always had a lean most all my life, but it was winnable. As Fairfax County became more expensive, it became bluer. And I remember once I sat through, not too long ago, the Board of Supervisors meeting there at the Government Center in Fairfax, and I was there to testify on behalf of a friend asked me to testify on some issue. And as I'm sitting there listening to them talk, I realized that was sort of the purpose of Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, to try to drive people out. Because if they can get rid of, especially the people on fixed incomes, get rid of them, they can flip those houses, make a lot more money. They can bring in a lot more revenue. And so I don't know, that may be the case with Montgomery and the others. They became so much more expensive and unaffordable because they wanted to. And then you can drive people out, because now in Fairfax County, there's not really much of a working or middle class anymore.
Yeah,
and now
workers that make $200,000 a year or more, you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel like it's an elitist proponent to it too. And I mean, not just the profit part of it, but this like getting rid of the undesirable, so to speak. And I think that we've seen over the past decade or so that shift of the Democrat Party becoming the elitist billionaire class party, whereas we have become much more the party of the blue collar working class. And it's been an interesting dynamic shift for sure. So Sean, I want to make sure we cover all the topics that you wanted to talk about. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you want to make sure we mention?
No, I think y'all were fine, and you're right. Kamala Harris, actually the only group she improved upon were voters that made more than $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
So that says everything. And you know, like you said, my cousins live in Winchester. They complain about Northern Virginia all the time taking away their votes. And now your new governor over there wants to have taxes on DoorDash and everything else, and they're about crying. My cousin's crying now about it. So
I can't live with that. That would be so.
They have something called. You guys had the rain tax once. We have something we're calling a sleep tax, and that is on a mattress. It's a $20 tax on every mattress. And
you're behind us. We already have a sleep tax. They're charging you for getting rid of your mattress. Yeah, you're just following our bad policy at this point.
His grandmother wasn't a moderate. That's what I laughed when they said she was, you know.
Well,
that's their big thing. They're all running as moderates, and then they get hoodwinked. And like, no, we saw it coming the entire time.
Well, we knew Wes Moore gave her a copy of all the taxes he raised last year to her at the inauguration. So Brian Crosby's gonna have to move to North Carolina because they've got the same tax coming into Virginia too.
There goes all the
My friends in
businesses.
South Carolina text me every day, when are you moving back? They're like, you can't afford reparations. You can't afford to live in Maryland. Why do you live there? They're like,
I have a friend from here who's texting me. She's like, I'm going to go look at houses in North Carolina. You coming with me? I'm like, I can't go yet. And also, it's my destiny to move to South Florida. I'm a Jewish woman. That is where I belong eventually.
South
So
Florida has
Sean,
better weather too.
that's true. Sean, you talked about you have your kickoff coming up again. You said April 17th. So
yeah,
where can
it's going to
people
be
go
at
to get
Bailey's and
tickets?
Bagels downtown.
Awesome. So where
here.
can people go to get tickets for that or to donate to your campaign?
Yeah, you can go to flahertyfordelegate.com. If you go to the event section, you'll see all about that. And there's a donate section on there. So, any bet helps. And, I kind of consider myself the underdog. I don't take any race for granted, but we got our work cut out for us between now and November. That's for sure.
Yes, well, you're doing all the right things. You're getting out, knocking doors, and talking to the people, and ultimately that's what's going to make the difference. Dwight, what do you have? What's the party up to?
Let's see. Special information. Our Pizza and Politics is going to be April 9th, and our speaker is going to be our candidate for Attorney General, Jim Rutledge. And we've got so Jim Rutledge is going to be speaking, and we've got a lunch at the Capitol Hill Club on April 17th. Sean, if you've got time, you should definitely go by that. Go to
and
that.
so you go to Capitol Hill Club and then drive right to only an hour to Hagerstown and go to that.
Yeah, I could do that. Yeah, it's we do have an Attorney General candidate, which is good because I thought we didn't have any of them running on.
Yeah,
our
and
side.
we've got a really good one. Jim
somebody.
is really good. Jim is a
Yeah.
great candidate. You can check out his information at electjim.com.
Good.
He was able to get electjim.com. That's great.
Yeah.
That's a
I
whole
was
other
wondering why
conversation.
nobody filed for that. I was like, there's not one Republican lawyer in the state that doesn't want to file for Attorney General to give Anthony Brown a run for his money, and nobody did. I was a little shocked about that.
Wow.
Well, I think one of the things with that was I think a lot of lawyers don't want to give up those billable hours, charging $300, $400, $600 an hour.
That's fair.
Mm.
I probably wouldn't want to either. Well, on the YR front, we just announced our Red, White, and Barbecue, which is our America 250 celebration. And the proceeds from that barbecue will be going to candidates like Sean, all of our young Republican candidates who make it past their primaries to help get them over the finish line. So that is going to be the same place we had our Christmas gala last year in Imesville, Frederick County, at the Green Meadows Farm Petting Zoo and Farm. It's going to be great. It's kid friendly. Tickets are like $20 max. Kids under 5 come for free. So bring your entire family. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. And it's going to some amazing candidates, all the proceeds. So definitely come out for that. Dave, what else? You write any new books lately?
No, but check my Substack, davidshepard.substack.com, and I keep trying to regularly update my columns. So check it out.
Yeah.
And,
By the way, Sean, do you like Italian food?
Yeah, I'm not picky. It's funny. My aunt and uncle, they live in North Bethesda.
Mm-hmm.
So they live near Pike and Rose, near I guess it's now the North Bethesda Liquor. They renamed it.
Yes. Yep.
And my aunt's Ethiopian, and it's like going to a different country there, which is very spicy food, which is funny. The DC area has the most Ethiopians outside of Ethiopia.
Really?
And, and I love my aunt and uncle, but they're very far left. They had an Ulcer Books and Raskin sign, and they called us stupid dumb hicks in Hagerstown, which shows you how open-minded and tolerant they are. But, they own a hair salon in D.C., and it's funny. She was complaining, I'm sick of the drugs and crime here. I was like, well, you kind of got what you voted for, So you didn't like hearing that, but I'm like, well, you drive a Tesla and you live in a nice house in Montgomery County. The rest of us don't live that way,
Yeah.
But
Dwight, how can we drown our sorrows in Italian carbs?
We go to Masoni's in Perry Hall. Great place. Mention the Bob and Kendall podcast and you'll get a discount. I'm not sure how much, but definitely Greg Masoni, great guy. And go there. They got great pizza. They got great food there. The ice cream is made
so
daily.
Good.
It is very good. It is made every day, and it's the Masoni family recipe.
Oh, love that. Well,
and you're like family when you go there.
It's not the Olive Garden. We don't want to get sued, Dwight.
They'll have good restaurants down there, but we do have the Dutch Market, which is the Amish food, is really good here.
You have an Olive Garden too in Hagerstown.
Yes.
Okay, we're
So,
dated. We can do better than Olive Garden, Dwight. But I think that's gonna do it for us. Dave, thank you so much for co-hosting with me. Sean, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for coming on. I know that you're gonna run a fabulous campaign. I'm looking forward to helping you out. And everyone, thank you for watching. We will be back next week.
Yeah, and support our sponsors. Go to Missoni's.
All right. See you guys.
See ya. Good night.
Let's go down to Missoni's, where Italian cuisine shines. Let's go